Number 43, George W. Bush. When you think of George Bush, what comes to mind is 9/11, the controversial 2000 elections, tax cuts, and the Iraqi War. Turbulent times. Bush was born in 1946 to George Bush Sr. and Barbara. He was a wild teenager. He made it to Yale and Harvard Business School, where despite hard work, he struggled with his grades. He had a hard time living up to his father's image, war hero, a sports star. There was heavy drinking and allegations of cocaine use. In a drunken state, he almost came to blows with his father, and his brother Jeb had to jump in and defuse the situation. Bush would get arrested and his father would bail him out. And he was good in college baseball, but not a star player like his father. In 1977, he met Laura Welch at a barbecue. 3 months later, he proposed. They got married in the Methodist Church. They had baby twins, Barbara and Jenna. Now, Bush attributes Laura as having a stabilizing effect on his life, and he quit drinking in 1986. He also became a born-again Christian. And now, despite his reputation, Bush is actually an avid reader. In the White House, he read the Bible daily and read over 186 books. He moved the family to Texas. He got into local politics, did not do well, got into oil business. He failed at that as well. But then he bought huge shares of the Texas Ranger baseball team, and that made him several millions of dollars. He joined his father's presidential re-election team as an advisor in 1992. In 1994, he ran for governor of Texas while his brother Jeb became governor of Florida. As governor, he cut taxes, increased spending for education programs towards alcohol and drug abuse and domestic violence. Texas became the leading producer of wind-powered energy. He promoted faith-based organizations and proclaimed June 10, 2000, Jesus Day. By this point, Bush had accumulated a strong financial and political base and a network of powerful friends, and he announced his candidacy for President of the United States. He was going to run against the Democratic nominee, Vice President Al Gore. The election was so close, and even though Al Gore got about 1 million more popular votes than Bush, Bush got more electoral votes, and the election in Florida was so close that recounts were demanded. Allegations were made, recounts were abandoned. This went all the way to the Supreme Court, and in the end, Bush became the 43rd President of the United States. Bush had promised to cut taxes, improve education, aid minorities, increase the armed forces, and bring integrity back to the White House. However, a deep recession had set in, and he was having a hard time. But then came September 11, 2001, 9/11, a terrorist attack. 4 passenger planes were hijacked by terrorists. One was overtaken by passengers and crashed onto a field. One was deliberately crashed into the Pentagon. 2 smashed into the World Trade Center, causing the 2 towers to catch fire and come down. It was a day much like Pearl Harbor, a day of infamy, and the world changed in that instance. Over 2,000 civilians died. All air traffic was suspended for a day. The country was on high alert, and the greatest manhunt in the history of the nation had begun for the one responsible. Osama bin Laden. He was born in Saudi Arabia from a family that owned a billion-dollar company. He would eventually be banished from Saudi Arabia and would settle in Afghanistan, where he funneled money and weapons to the Mujahideen in their fight against the Soviets. He founded the terrorist group Al-Qaeda, organized several terrorist attacks, and was already on top of the FBI's most wanted list before 9/11. Bush was in a daycare when the 9/11 attack occurred. He left. He stopped at an airbase before deciding it prudent to return to the White House. Several appearances followed as Bush reassured the nation that the evildoers would be stopped and dealt with. He visited the site of the attack, now known as Ground Zero, and was shocked at the devastation. October 8, 2011, thousands of American troops invaded Afghanistan and overthrew the Afghan radical Taliban government that was harboring Al-Qaeda. Now, several Al-Qaeda members were captured, but bin Laden got away. One political consequence of all of this is that Bush became very, very popular, so much so that it was hard for Congress to go against anything that he said. So he went ahead with his tax cuts and his other programs. And, well, they went through. In the middle of all this, Bush went ahead with the tax cut. Many questioned why give a tax cut in the middle of wartime, but he pushed ahead, and the $1.35 trillion tax cut was given. The idea was that it would create jobs. It did give the economy a bump, but it also cost the government trillions of dollars in the next few years. The deficit would skyrocket. What was once a $2.37 billion surplus became a $480 billion deficit by 2004. Now, before Bush, religious organizations received federal assistance, but now Bush promoted legislation to remove some regulations of how this money was spent. Now, Bush was a little ambivalent about gay rights. He once spoke of pushing an amendment prohibiting marriage among gays, yet he said he didn't oppose a legal union of another kind. He didn't want to fight the conservative right, and there were no advances made towards gay rights, other than the appointment of a few key political figures. Bush also had a problem with universities and race quotas, yet he did appoint Colin Powell as the first black Secretary of State, and this position was later filled by Condoleezza Rice. Bush poured money into science, math, and the space program, but he did not pour money into biology since he and the Republican Party opposed global warming studies. He also would not allow embryonic stem cell research. Bush agreed that climate change was real, but he wasn't convinced that it was man-made. Studies and files were watered down to fit the administration's beliefs, and some politicians even had to resign. Oil drilling began on the Alaskan coast. Now, Bush did sign the Clean Air Act, but he allowed industries that were already operating to continue under already existing regulations. Bush signed the No Child Left Behind Act. Students' performances would be evaluated, resulting in more federal funds being poured into elementary and secondary schools. It has been controversial, too much emphasis on standardized testing, but Bush did increase government spending in education by $14 billion. Now, while the manhunt was still going on for Osama bin Laden and a moderate government was established in Afghanistan, Bush decided to go after King Saddam Hussein in Iraq. Why? Well, many, even during the Clinton administration, said that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction in his arsenal, and though inspections were made, they found nothing. Some felt, however, that Saddam Hussein was lying. There was a policy of containment under Clinton, but Bush decided that Saddam Hussein had to give up the weapons, give up his mandate, and if he didn't comply, he had to go. Talks and threats and constant statements tying Saddam to weapons of mass destruction and terrorism actually made many Americans believe that Saddam Hussein had caused 9/11. On March 2003, U.S. and British troops bombed Iraq relentlessly before invading and toppling the Iraqi government. Saddam Hussein went into hiding. In 2004, Bush easily won re-election. He didn't run on the economy or the increasingly unpopular war in Iraq. He convinced the American people that they were safer with him, that his opponent, John Kerry, was for gay unions while he was against it, that Kerry flip-flopped on many issues, that Kerry was for abortion rights while Bush was against them. Bush ran on family values, and he won. It was easy to topple Saddam Hussein, but it was not easy to occupy the country. Civil war broke out in Iraq between the Shiites and the Sunnis, and occupying American and British troops were stuck in the middle. Saddam Hussein was discovered. He was found in a hole, and after that, well, he was tried and he was executed. The press was not allowed to film arriving American bodies, but the tally was alarming. The war dragged on, and the American people were more and more disgruntled. No weapons of mass destruction were ever found. It now seems like a very costly mistake. There was an oil shortage, and of course gas prices went up, And after all of this, unemployment went up. The median household income had dropped. The national debt went from $5.6 trillion to $11 trillion. Then came the real estate market bust. And after Lehman Brothers collapsed, the government took over Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, as well as bailing out the American International Group at $85 billion. In November 2008, 500,000 jobs were lost in the worst financial crisis since the Great Depression. And when Bush left office in 2008, his popularity had dropped down to 19%, an all-time low. So what can we say about George W. Bush? Well, it's still a little soon. It's only 2016. Years from now, history will surely have us reassess his legacy. But in the meantime, this is Cool Talk. Comment below, or better yet, subscribe.